Hey everybody, welcome to this episode of the Wellbeing Wire. Today we're going to be discussing the question of should we be focusing on health span rather than lifespan? Now, you've probably read that recent article in The Guardian that was talking about the cost of obesity to the NHS. I think it's a bit over £1,300 a year for somebody who's obese compared to around a bit over £600 for the average person of a normal weight. So today we're going to be discussing all things related to health span and lifespan, and I'm joined by a resident expert with a very keen interest in lifestyle and health, and someone who doesn't like to be referred to as an expert. So, Neil, do you want to just quickly tell our listeners, those who haven't come across you before, who you are and why they should listen to you? Give us your 10-second headline.
Yes, I'm Neill Friedman. I am currently a postgraduate student at the University of Northampton, where I'm specifically looking at the relationship between lifestyle factors and health at a molecular level. I also have an undergrad degree in sports and exercise science, and I'm the co-director of a social enterprise, a not-for-profit social enterprise called the BERG F, which looks to channel social impact funds towards independent future health related science and scientists. And really, my passion is everything that makes. Knew that was going to happen. You'll have an edit point there, dog barking. Yeah, so I have a real passion for anything that relates lifestyle to health, beyond medication and beyond the treatment of symptoms. So that's who I am. That's what I'm about.
Nice one, Neil. Thank you. So Neil and I have obviously a common interest on these lifestyle factors and how we can actually lead healthier lifestyles. So we can, there's medication out there, but there are alternative ways to lead healthier lifestyles. So I'm going to start with a definition because we're here today to discuss the question of should we be focusing on health span rather than lifespan. But before we get there, we need to know what the hell we're talking about. So I'm going to give you the definition, one of the definitions I picked up on what health span is, and this was from the NASM. So that's the National Association of Sports Medicine in America. Health span refers to the period of a person's life during which they are generally healthy and free from severe or chronic disease. And this refers to the more traditional focus of the medical community of lifespan, which spans the entirety of a human life, including chronic illness. So essentially, health span, according to this definition, is how long someone lives for before they have disease. Whereas typically in society, we just focus on how long someone lives for, end of. What would you say to that definition, Neil? Would you add to that or change that? What would you say?
Yeah, I think that's a good summary of it. I've got a bit in front of me here, which probably maybe expand that because health span actually also has a legal explanation because governments obviously look at these things, and I'll talk about some policies we've got there. So let me give you what the UK government, how the UK government defines health span, because I think it's important. So according to the Office of National Statistics, health span comprises two factors: healthy life expectancy, or HLE, and disability-free life expectancy, which is DFLE. And each of those obviously has a slight sub-explanation. So healthy life expectancy is an estimate of the number of years lived in very good or good general health, while disability-free life expectancy is an estimate of the number of years lived without a long-lasting physical or mental health condition that limits daily activities. And both of these metrics are then combined to form health span. And I think that's quite important because they then bring in mental health as part of disability. So some people might say, well, you can't go to work because because of a physical disability. But then they don't think about the fact that there are people that are not able to work because they have mental health disability. So I think it's important to know that at least at this point, the government have got it right in that the legal definition of what they're talking about covers both mental and physical health.
Yeah, yeah. So, I mean, when we think about, I guess we merge physical and mental together, which makes complete sense. Mental health, physical health, metabolic health influences your mental health influences your metabolic health. These things are interconnected, aren't they? So I guess we have to think of ourselves as one rather than a mind or body. When you bring those two things together, as they should be together, that probably means there's not that many people in this country, I would have thought, that have a high health span. What would you say to that?
So again, I always differentiate sort of opinion and fact. So rather than share with you in this particular case my opinion, let me give you some facts. Produced in 2022 by the Center for Aging Better, and this data is up to the end of 2019. So these are pre-COVID figures, and I think that's really important. So health span in the UK has decreased, so that in 2019 for men, the average health span is 61.9 years. And for women, it is 60.5 years. All right. So let's just put that into a bit of perspective. Lifespan in the UK at the moment has stalled. So we saw lifespan increasing for quite a while, and it's now stalled. So that's another issue, but it's stalled at about 85 years. So at the point where you're born, you're expected to live to about 85. That's the gen in the UK. But if you're a male at 61.9 years, your health span has deteriorated to the point where you are technically described as disabled. So if we just round those figures up, if we call that 64 years, living to 85 years, what's that? 26 years? Am my maths right?
Yeah, well,
20, 24
23
years
years, 23 years,
of
yeah, I
being
think.
alive, but being in a position where you are technically defined as disabled for either mental or physical reasons, not able to hold down a full-time job, potentially needing a carer. That's a long time. That's a long time to be in poor health.
Yeah.
And if you think about that again in terms of the government relationship, so we all know we see what's happening in France, but in the UK, we're trying to do the same thing here. We're looking at raising the pension age. So we're saying that people are living longer. So we're basing that on this 85 years of lifespan. And therefore, governments can't really afford to keep paying pensions from the age of 65, although especially since we have an aging population. So we have a lower amount of younger people coming in and feeding into the pension fund. So which is why they want to raise the pension age. But all of that is completely hypothetical. It's rhetorical. If people have to stop working at the age 62 anyway for health reasons,
Yeah.
so they're then claiming, they're not paying into their pension pot from 62. They're costing the NHS. I don't want to say they're a burden on society. It's probably a bad choice of words, but they're a financial drain because they're now having to draw out more than they're contributing. So it doesn't matter if you remove the retirement age from 65 to 75. They're drawing on the state funds from the point where they're no longer able to work.
Yeah.
So not only do we have the important issue, which is people living in poor health, but we also have the big society factor, because obviously, there's where we're seeing a lack of funds going towards the NHS. We're seeing part of the burden on the entire healthcare system, not just the NHS portion of the healthcare system. And so focus or resources are potentially being drawn away. I'm going to say, from where they typically would really be needed, because
Yeah.
we've just got this wide range. I think the stats, I haven't got them in front of me, but I think the stats basically says that 19% of the British population is currently over the age of 65, which
Right.
means
Okay.
which means that 19% of the population is already past this health span transition point. But that number is expected to go up to 22% of the population within the next 10 years.
Yeah.
So in 10 years' time, 22% of our population will be above the age of 65. And if these health span statistics don't improve, that means that 22% of our population potentially are living in poor health.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's do was it that famous quote from Maggie Thatcher? Don't bring me problems, bring me solutions. Right. So we know it's an absolute mess what's going on at the moment. Our health as a nation, as many other countries are in real problem. Let's talk. I want to explore what we can do about this. Okay, because I think that's the thing. We know it's not good. You only have to walk out in the street and look at 10 people. 8 of them are probably going to be, at least overweight. And how many of those would be in poor health as well? Obviously, if you're overweight, you're going to be having metabolic health issues further down the line anyway. So let's think about. I want to ask you a question then. Why did the government set the bar so low? Why have we focused on living longer rather than living well?
That's a great question as to how we've got here. I think initially, I'm going back, probably 20, 30 years when we saw, the antibiotics and the things really revolutionizing coming through. I think lifespan did have an important factor, and I think it's probably worth noting though that even on lifespan, and again, I'm just kind of looking to have some figures here. But even on lifespan, so I know we're talking health span, but even on lifespan, we're seeing a problem. So just here, recently published information states that in the 1950s, the UK had one of the longest life expectancies in the world, ranking seventh globally behind countries such as Denmark, Norway, and Sweden. But in 2021, we were ranked 29th.
Wow.
Right. So even on the lifespan thing, even on how long we're living, as I say, we seem to have plateaued at about 85 years old as an average, as being thing. And we're also seeing, and we haven't touched on this, we're also seeing very big discrepancies in terms of the difference in socioeconomic environments.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
So if we look at just that health span factor, as I said, there's that average, as I've given you there for males and females, but there is a 19-year difference between the wealthiest parts communities and the poorest.
Okay.
All right. So poorest communities, or the people in poorest communities, people are expected to cross that health span barrier 19 years earlier than people that live in the wealthiest areas. All
Wow.
right.
Okay.
Now
Why?
so that comes down to the big question. So and probably one of those big things that's pretty hotly debated, where people say, where does the onus of responsibility sit? Is it the individual, or is it our responsibility to take care of ourselves?
Hmm.
And I think firstly the answer to that has to be yes. We can't
Of
ignore
course.
that fact.
Yeah.
But we also need to understand that the ability to do that is determined by our environment. It's
Yeah.
determined by our level of education. It's determined by our access to facilities, and it's determined by what we can afford and how we can do things. So we know that the current cost of living crisis and this massive amount of food inflation is
Hmm.
impacting the health of poorer people, or people that are worse off socioeconomically than it is the wealthier people.
Yeah.
And that comes down to, I know one of these things we've spoken about before, highly processed foods.
Yeah.
So as food pricing goes up, unbelievably, products that are the least processed are going up hugely, and yet the products that are highly processed, they're still going up, but they're going up from a lower base. So
Why do you think that is then? Because I guess if you think about processed foods, you've got something called value added. Whereas, let's say if you, Marks and Spencer, I think were one of the first to take an apple and cut it into chunks and put it in a plastic container and cellophane. Therefore, they could sell an apple for £1 or whatever it was. We're talking 15, 20 years ago. But you've done something to it. You've added value to it. You've coated the piece of chicken. You've seasoned the olives. Therefore, you've added value, so you can charge more. So you would think that the processed foods would be cheaper than the non-processed foods. What do you think is going on there?
Okay, so I think there's a huge number of factors there, I don't think I'm the economic expert to be able to cover all of them. But the biggest problem we have at the moment is Britain is unique in Europe. I don't know about the rest of the world, but certainly unique in Europe, in that the cost of products is completely and absolutely determined by the supermarkets. All
Yeah.
right.
Okay. Yeah.
So our farmers are dictated to as to how much they will have their product sold for when they sell to the supply chain. And obviously the consumers know what we have to buy it. And basically the supermarkets have absolute control of pricing. So we see products where farmers are bringing products to the shelves at a loss. All right. Because the supermarkets, milk is a great example. So supermarkets
And
will not,
eggs.
yeah, yeah. Well, they dictate the price such that they make it very difficult. So we're almost seeing this degradation of the farming industry. So as British farming has become suppressed, I know this changes afoot now, hopefully, more and more things are imported. The fresh vegetables are imported. But there's also this other economic factor. So one of the main reasons we over process food is to extend the shelf life.
Yeah.
All right. So it may cost the supermarket less for an apple. All right. But they're going to throw away more fresh apples that aren't sold because they go rotten. Then they're going to take prefabricated, I don't know, apple crumble,
Hmm.
which has gone through, a 20-step process and has just had all the nutrients washed out of them. and all the raw products chemically altered to the point where you've lost the value to them.
Mm.
But because that'll then sit in the supermarket shelf for 3 months before it passes its sell-by date, it's economically better for the supermarket. They can sell that at a lower price
Mm.
because they know that they don't have to cover off a percentage of the sales to cover off the products which get thrown away.
So essentially, the I guess the moral of the story is create foods that never ever go off. That way, if
Absolutely.
you're a supermarket, that forget freshness.
Absolutely. And it comes down to that, that famous YouTube video of the McDonald's burger that's put in the cupboard. I think I've just mentioned this before. This guy put the burger in his cupboard for 3 weeks and took it out 3 weeks later, and it looked pretty much the same 3 weeks later. In other
That's not
words, it had been
surprising.
so chemically altered, both the bun, if you want to call it that, and the patty, that it didn't contain enough nutrients for mold to be able to feed off.
Wow.
Um, but the reason that McDonald's want to do that is not because they're trying to poison you. It's because they don't want to throw away hard, rotten, moldy buns in the store.
Yeah.
So if they can produce a bun that can sit at each individual franchise and not go off for 3 months, and they can still use it, that's cost effective for them. They're not throwing away stock that's gone moldy.
That's
Yeah.
it's an amazing business model. Well, I think, and that's the I think we have to understand when it comes to health and lifestyle, your health kind of is for sale. The people out there who are creating these foods don't have your health at heart. They're not thinking, oh, how can I make Neil or healthy, or how can I make Jonathan healthy? They're thinking, how can we maximize profit? And that's obviously the way the business works for shareholders. So people have to be aware of what's going on here. Just to we'll jump back back on course with the question of the day. So who benefits from us focusing on lifespan rather than health span, do you think?
I think the medical industry, for starters, the pharmaceutical industry. But I'm not sure it's so much to do. I think, yeah. So obviously, the longer we live sick, the better it is for anybody that's making a profit out of disease. All
So
right.
medical
So
devices,
yeah.
medications.
So yeah, the medical devices, medications, suppliers to the NHS. So we know that the NHS is not would love to have us being not sick because of their budgets are capped by government,
Hmm.
but certainly the people that are supplying them wouldn't. And of course, a lot of what happens in the UK here is dictated by what's happening in the US, where the model is very different. They don't have an NHS,
Yeah.
so there it's all about the healthcare insurance. And there it's all about how much money the hospitals want to be make it, it's expensive to be sick in the US. All right.
Medicaid.
Yeah. What people don't realize is it's also expensive to be sick in the UK. We're just not paying for it with each visit or each hospital stay.
Yeah.
We're paying for it with our taxes and with our national insurance. And it's being fed in through, through that system. So ultimately, we're still paying for it. And the challenge we have at the moment, the challenge government has, and all the stuff we're seeing on on TV at the moment on the news, is because actually, based on this health span issue, we are not paying enough in taxes to cover the costs.
Hmm.
And of course, the way the messaging is put out is the hospitals want more, want more cash to cover the costs that they don't want, they need. But the other side of that model is if we can stop people getting sick at such an early age,
Exactly.
then that's also got a financial benefit. And the government recognized this in principle. So again, I want to put something that came from the Department of Health and Social Care. So it's worth noting this. So the government have a stated objective, but they've said the government's ambition is to improve healthy life expectancy by 5 years by 2035 and reduce the gap between areas where it's highest and lowest by 2030.
Okay.
So
How?
there is, yeah. So that's the question. So there is an ambition.
Hmm.
I think the way that they're trying to get there is wrong, and it kind of ties in a little bit with the BERG F company that I've co-founded, in that the power of lobbying still dominates.
Yeah.
And so very often the solution is now trying to be a product or a drug,
Yeah.
and the research is towards a product or a drug. So we go back to, I think, what our prime topic was the last time you and I spoke, which was around the obesity injection. Yeah.
Yeah.
Take the shot and it'll stop you. So ideally, that's what the commercial world would like to see. We'd like to see we can improve health span by selling you a drug to help you improve health span.
Do you think that's
Um,
possible? Do you think you can medicate your way to health span, to a greater
no.
health span?
I think you could in terms of an illusion, in that you can mask the symptoms possibly for longer,
Right.
um, but it's going to catch up eventually, and I don't think you can do it continuously. So talk about again, let's go back to what we spoke about last time, which was the obesity injection.
Mm.
You know, I think one of the points we really stressed there was, yeah, it'll help you lose a bit of weight as long as you're having the injections every month,
Yeah.
but the funding to the NHS is for an 18-month program, and if during that 18 months there's no lifestyle change and nothing happening in your environment, all that's going to happen when the medication gets stopped 18 months later is you're going to put the weight straight back on. So
Yes.
you've battered the problem 18 months down the line.
18-month
Um,
honeymoon.
yeah, absolutely. Unless you use that window. So if you have somebody who's chronically obese and battling to change, then I see that intervention can help break the cycle, can help reduce some of those symptoms.
Yeah.
But it has to be in conjunction with something else to make sure that after the 18 months, there's a fundamental lifestyle change in that individual,
Okay.
so that the solution becomes more sustainable.
Well,
And the same thing happens with everything else. So, you know, we manufacture insulin, artificial insulin, for people with type 2 or people with diabetes. All right. Insulin helps you digest some of the glucose, but insulin does not cure diabetes,
no, of course.
right? Statins, which we give people who are at risk of heart disease, um, prevents, while you're on the statins, the fat buildup of dyslipidemia, etc. But it doesn't cure heart disease.
No.
It suppresses the symptoms. And I think, so the medications do that. So I'm not saying there's no room for medications. I mean, undoubtedly, medications save lives.
Yeah.
All right. But I think we need to look at medications as being able to get us over a stumbling point, over a blockage, for example.
Yeah.
Um, but
Okay.
if there's no lifestyle solution that goes with that, then the alternative is a lifetime of medication.
And I think
And
with that
again,
as well, it's a trade-off, isn't it? I mean, if you look into the psychiatric industry, I think it's around about the 60s, the drug model was different to how it is today. So there's a disease model now. The idea is there's something wrong in your brain and the medications cure that, which we know obviously that's not true. It doesn't cure anything. It covers symptoms. The drug model originally was you take the drug for the smallest dose for the shortest period of time whilst you're working through the issue that's affecting you. So let's say if someone's feeling depressed, getting to the bottom of that through therapy whilst using the drugs to help them maybe take part in the therapy, but also to reduce the symptoms to a degree where they are able to confront. So same with physical health. It's the idea that now it's just masking masking the symptoms, which again, like you said, it's kicking the can down the road, but also I think it's doing more than kicking the can down the road, because there's a trade-off every time you take a medication. You're saying I'm willing to take the risk of what this might do to my health. We know things like insulin. People who take insulin for life tend to not to live as long. So I'm willing to pay that price for the relief I'm going to get for the medication. So it's a balance, isn't it? It's deciding what I'm willing to risk for the benefits of that medication.
so yeah, so no medicine. So firstly, every single medicine has a side effect. All right. Some side effects are easier to deal with than others, and we all respond slightly different. And no medication is specifically designed to be supplied for a lifetime. Now, yes, we need to take some exceptions to that. So if you're born with type 1 diabetes and your body is completely unable to manufacture insulin, then you are going to be on insulin for life. Although there are side effects and negatives, those side effects and negatives are better than the alternative of not having the insulin.
Yeah.
But when you've gone from type 2 diabetes, where you started off being insulin resistant, um, rather than not producing insulin, um, and then you start to treat the symptom, which is the insulin resistance with insulin, you're upping the problem. You're not making it worse, and that is something that's reversible. So we need to just be a little bit clarified. There are some people that have diseases or genetic problems or whatever it might be, where there is no choice. Life without medication is non-existent almost.
Yeah, of
So for those
course.
people, I don't want people to, I don't want people to get to think that we're trying to push the message across that nobody should be on medication for life. There are
No,
instances where there are certainly people where the benefits outweigh the risk, and they need to be it.
of
But
course.
the problem we have is around this idea of symptoms. So there's a Dr. Robert Naveau, who's based at the University of San Diego, who came up with a really, really interesting statement. He goes, the path to health is not the same pathway that leads to disease. And I think that's quite important. So what a lot of people, what the current medical world kind of works on is that, we're born in one state and then we follow this downward progression towards a disease state, and
Mm.
we can then use drugs to stop these symptoms, and that by slowing down the symptoms or masking the symptoms, we might be able to push that path backwards
Oh,
down
okay.
the same path backwards. And you can't do that. The path to disease, the path to pathogenesis, is in one direction, and masking symptoms or suppressing symptoms doesn't stop that. The pathway to health is a different pathway.
Yeah.
The pathway to health is around lifestyle. The pathway to health is around your behavior, etc. But bringing it a little bit back to the point I was trying to make earlier, where I was saying that, is it a personal, is it our individual responsibility, or is there a greater thing? So I made the point that I think we all have to take personal responsibility. However, the environment in which we are exposed has a far greater effect than anything we can do as individuals.
Of course. And I think with the
Right.
environment as well, the environment, I think when people think environment, think, okay, the shops, all those, the food you've got in the fridge, but environment could even go as far back as being in the womb. The environment that your mum ate in whilst she was pregnant with you, that environment can have an impact as well. So environment's
Absolutely.
massive.
Absolutely. And there's this strange thing at the moment where practitioners or people that are looking at this research are treading a really, really difficult and fine line, where we know that certain behaviors within pregnant women lead to potentially lifetime illnesses in their offspring, in the babies. All right.
Okay.
And some of these are neurological disorders as well. Um, and government are scared about putting that message out, because what they're trying to avoid is guilting a mother who's already got a child. So if you've got a child who is, I'm going to just pick on who's autistic, all right. If you now turn around and say that something in the diet that the mother had has predisposed her child to autism, you potentially have a whole bunch of mothers who are going through a real tough time because they're bringing up a highly autistic child, who now starts to get guilted, and they start believing, oh, if only I hadn't eaten that, if only I hadn't done that, if only I had done this, I wouldn't be facing, I've disabled my child, for want of a better word.
Yeah.
And we don't want to guilt, that people are going through a tough enough. So how do you get a message across to people that are going to get pregnant now, to say this is what you should be doing to prevent, or to try to prevent, because you can't prevent everything, but you
Mm.
should try to present some of these potential problems in your children.
Yeah.
But at the same time, you want to get that message across in a way that doesn't guilt parents who are already dealing with kids with that problem into, going through a lifetime of saying, it's my fault, what did I do wrong?
Yeah.
Because actually it's not their fault, because if they weren't given the message and they didn't know, that comes back to this education story.
Yeah.
All right. So that's really important. That's kind of a little bit about the work that I'm doing, it because to understand that, you got to go past correlation. All right. You've got to be able to show that a mother, or even a father at the point of conception, potentially, that something in their diet made some form of cellular change within that individual, and that cellular change has then predisposed the child, the baby, to mutations that lead to disease. All right.
Yeah.
Because unless you can show that on a molecular level, it's just correlation. All
Okay.
right. So if I turn around and say people who drank, I don't know, raw, I'm just making this up. So for anyone who's listening, I'm not saying it. If you drank raw vegetable oil right through your pregnancy, don't do that, by the way. And now your child is autistic. It might be that 10 people who did that now have an autistic child, but those 10 people might have also been a smoker. Those
Yeah.
10 people might have also not done any physical exercise. Those 10 people might have all had the same gene mutation. It's purely genetics. All right.
Yeah.
So just because they drank the oil doesn't mean that was the cause. So in order for policy to be formed, in order for the environment, or in order for the government to create policy that causes change to the environment, we need to know causation. We need to know that drinking that oil caused the autism or
Yeah,
led
of
to the
course.
potential for it. Because and that's kind of what's missing to some extent in the research at the moment.
But we do
And the
know
reason it's missing in
smoking,
yeah,
drinking, all of those things,
drinking high
being
fat
sedentary.
foods, high sugar foods, whatever it might be. My thing is the processing and the carbohydrates. Um, but all of these things potentially have the problem. The challenge that we have is that the research companies, and I'm going to pick on Big Pharma again. Sorry, Big Pharma, but it's just the way it goes. They're not going to invest huge amounts of research into discovering that if a mother changes her behavior, the child's not going to get sick. All right.
Of
They want
course.
those funds to be able to channel that into a pill to give to the child when they get the disease to hide the symptoms.
Yeah.
Right. Because that way they get a return on their investment. And that is the biggest problem we have with research funding at the moment, is that the research funding is driven to some place where there's a potential for a return.
Yeah, the research should be, I guess we need research to be funded by the government into things like that to find out if the government truly wants a healthier nation, then obviously it has to be government funded, doesn't it? Publicly funded to find out the answer to those things. So,
And then
so go on, go on.
I was going to say, and then of course, the government's decision on to invest those funds or not is subject to lobbying,
Yeah.
right? So I come back to the point you made earlier about companies looking after their shareholders. We've got to understand. So there's this brilliant term, stakeholders. So we often hear companies refer to the benefit of their stakeholders, and by stakeholders they generally refer to shareholders, staff, and their market, the consumer. The truth of the matter is, though, is that we have a legal system in this country that says that a for-profit business, your average business, one that's just a share, actually only has a legal obligation to one of those three stakeholders, and that's the shareholders.
Yeah.
Right? They have no legal obligation to their staff, and they have no legal obligation to the consumer base. All right. So a company, in all their messaging and all their advertising, anybody listening, you got to think that their only priority is shareholder return.
Yeah, of
And
course.
that is the only thing that they are legally obliged to do. Of course, there are a lot of companies that get involved in social impact, and there are a lot of companies that extend some for, I will say there will some that do it for lip service and some for brownie points. But there's also more and more companies now today realizing that there's a bigger picture. And whilst their legal obligation might only be to their shareholders, they're now starting to make a moral judgment and a moral input into getting involved in social impact
Yeah.
studies.
Of course. I mean, the thing is, though, we have to be, it's kind of obvious, isn't it? You can't rely, if somebody's benefiting from providing unhealthy foods or for smoking more, drinking more, being sedentary, they're not going to be part of the solution, are they? And that's just obvious. Why would you want to work to find out a way to reduce your market share or your sales revenue? It doesn't make sense. So
Unless they have to be.
individuals
And,
have to start be thinking, we have to start thinking about educating ourselves. I think that's where it all comes down to, has to be education. I, like you, think the environment is the biggest factor. Yes, we all have to be responsible for personal decisions, but ultimately the messaging from the media, half of the nonsense science that comes out from the media, like people who drink one drink a day live longer than are healthier than people who are teetotal, which again would be a correlation study, because it might be the fact that people who are teetotal might be teetotal for a reason. That's why they tend not to live as long. So a lot of the messaging you get from the media, we can't trust. So where are people going to go for information?
I'm not generally one to defend the media, but I am going to put a little caveat onto that. A lot of the time, the slightly misleading messaging is fed to the media by the research institution from which that funding comes about.
Of course, yeah.
And that's quite
It's
strange
PR.
because the press office within that, so universities in particular, publications count towards the reputation of your university, and the more you're in the press, the more students you get, and the more students you get, the more revenue you get. So very often a scientific study will be done within a university, and the study might be looking at, I don't know, the effects on milk on toenail growth, all right, and it might just be that somewhere in the byline of that, they also discovered that the people that drank 5 cups of coffee a day with the milk in it, also coincidentally also happened to have nicer hair. All right, it wasn't the focus of the study, that wasn't the hypothesis, that was being tested, but the guy in the media office caught that one line and he said that will get us newspaper. So
Yeah.
suddenly you've got a whole bunch of newspaper articles talking about, having 5 cups of coffee a day with milk in them is going to make your hair grow better.
Which
And that becomes the media hype, and that's what everybody picks up. But it's actually, it originated by the press office putting a catchy headline to their press release in an attempt to get published. So
I would
yes, the
say,
media can go too far, but
yeah, I
yeah,
mean,
research institutions have a role.
there's obviously a PR companies actively putting out nonsense information as well. When you hear things about, I don't know, we've discovered that the 5th of June is the happiest day of the year, and we've got a professor to put their name to it. Absolute nonsense, but it gets credibility because it goes out in the mainstream press. So I think people have to be aware that the messaging they're receiving, there's obviously an agenda behind this sort of messaging, and you have to rely on your own discernment really of what is good and what's bad. But you've got this diet's the best diet, that diet's the best diet, this is the best exercise, that's the best exercise, this is best meditation, this is the best way to fast. So what sort of rule of thumb might you add? You mentioned to people if who want to focus on living, they don't just want to live to 100, they want to live to 100 well. They want to be thriving in their old age. So what do you think would be a rule of thumb people could follow if that was their objective of health span rather than lifespan?
Yeah, so obviously it's complex, and and I'm doing research specifically looking at glucose in this area. But if I was to give you the off the cuff simple one, first thing is, on all of this, learn to be thinking critically. When you see any of those headlines, read the paper, and if you think there's a remote truth of it, try to find the actual original study that they're referring to. And you don't have to be a scientist, you don't have to read the whole study. A lot of it might be stuff you don't understand, but go to the conclusions and read the conclusions of the people who actually did the study rather than the press office. So that's just something to keep yourself aware of. But in terms of some really simple things, the ultra processed food, we've got to find a way of getting that out of our diet. So 75% of the food on our supermarket shelves is ultra processed. All right. And I'll just give you a simple little thing. You take an onion out the ground, right? Just a simple onion, package it up, put it in the supermarket. That has an ultra processed score somewhere around 0, right? It hasn't really been changed. The most it's been done is it's been put in a piece of, put in some packaging, which doesn't fundamentally change it. You can buy that onion, bring it at home, chop it up. That's a process, but you're doing that at home. You're chopping it up, and then you're going to cook it, and that's another process. How you cook it, you can choose a healthy way, maybe grilling it. You can choose a less healthy way of frying it in oil. There's different ways that you can do that and put it on your plate. You can then buy onions in sort of various different process steps, but the 100, if out the ground is 0, kind of the 99 to 100 is where you buy ready cooked, battered, fried onions in a packet that all you got to do is warm them up in the oven quickly, and you've got fried onions. All right. And then what you think of what you've done is you've handed all those processes, and now somewhere along the way it's been cut. Then it's been coated in something to stop it from continuing to ripen, because they don't want the onion to ripen past that point. Then it's been cooked, and it's been cooked in some sort of very high, they're not going to cook it nice and gently. It's gone in a really high, probably hydrolyzed oil format.
Canola oils.
Yeah, something like to flash cook it. Prior to that, it's been coated in not just eggs to batter it, but in some kind of eggs that have gone through, or egg white that's gone through about 10 different processes on its own to get to that point. So it's now powdered egg white. So it's been dried and powdered. That's got its own couple of preservatives in there to make sure that doesn't yellow and brown, because you don't want that to happen. And then it gets put into its plastic bag, and then it gets the air sucked out and some CO2 put in again to make it last longer. all so that you can take it home. So that's one product. It's an onion at the end of the day.
Yeah.
But you just think about all the different steps. I read something, and I'm going back, even before all this hype around ultra processed food. I just read a great piece of advice, and maybe this is the advice I'll give to answer your question. Is
Mm.
try to eat food that's cooked by a person and not by a corporation. Um,
Yeah.
and I think that's so good. And restaurant food potentially is cooked by a person, right? So
Mm.
if you go out and you get some onions on your plate at a restaurant, what's that restaurant doing? If it's a good price, high classy restaurant, again, the pricing is now suddenly become an issue. They're going to
Mm.
buy fresh onions and they're going to make it in their own proprietary recipe and they're going to cook it and they're going to prepare it.
Yeah.
If you're going to a cheap takeaway, they've gone and they've bought the supermarket one, right? They've bought the ready-made, ready-processed food, and they're dipping that in oil, further with 2 seconds to heat it up and stick it into your carton of your carton takeaway,
Yeah.
or wrap it in your kebab or whatever it is. Yeah, so I think that's actually I need to go back and remember that for myself quite a bit. Yeah,
Okay.
try to have food that's cooked by a person and not by a corporation. I enjoy that.
Yeah, and also that person could be you as well, rather than, not if we can't all afford to eat at restaurants, but we can
No,
all be
sensibly, it should
that.
be you.
We can all
Yeah,
be our own chef, can't we? And I think if you're eating stuff that you've bought, you know what's in it, you know the ingredients list, and I always think of the caveman diet. You remember there was a big movement around the Paleolithic movement, eating things that our cavewoman ancestors would have eaten. And I think there might have been some flaws in that, but essentially it's saying eat real foods. You could say, even if you don't want to do the caveman thing, eat what your grandparents would have eaten. They wouldn't have had all this junk food that we had because it didn't all exist back then. And I think
absolutely.
it's when you try to take your lifestyle, because this is what we're talking about here, aren't we? We're talking about lifestyle related disease.
Yeah,
We said earlier, we're not talking about people who are born with issues. Lifestyle related things that we've brought on through our choices and our environment. So if we take things back to being as natural as possible, going to sleep when it gets dark rather than putting on artificial light, waking up when the sun comes up and getting sun in our eyes, eating foods that grew in the ground or that were roaming around or grew on trees, moving our bodies, lifting heavy things, moving quickly, we're living that lifestyle. And I think as we move away from living a healthy lifestyle, that's when all these diseases of affluence come in. Because I don't know about you, Neil, but I would say, is it possible anybody could go through life eating these processed foods and experience a high health span?
I'm not going to say it's impossible, but you'd have to have a really, really great set of genetic luck to get there, to be honest with you. And you're going to be in a very, very small percentage of the population group. But never say never. I mean, we've all heard the story of somebody's grandmother that drank, a bottle of whiskey and smoked 100 cigarettes a day and lived until they were 105. You get people like that. Those genetic mutations are out there,
But
but
can
we
I just
hear about them because they're the exception, not the norm.
Can I jump in there as well? Because you often do have that argument about maybe not about not giving up smoking. Yes, well, my mum lived to 100 and she smoked 60 cigarettes a day. I would say that's fine, but could she walk up the stairs comfortably? Could she do a push up? Could she touch her toes? Could she go shopping on her own? Those things. So just again, that example perfectly highlights the difference between lifespan and health span. Yes, she lived to
Absolutely.
100, but how long did she live in good health?
And without care. I mean, I've always said the point that I'm happy for someone to come up with the euthanasia injection is if I can't get out of bed on my own to be able to go to the toilet, that for me, I'm not living anymore. But just want
Mm,
to come back to that environmental thing, because we need to be cognizant, and you've got a broad base of listeners. We need to be cognizant that environment is bigger. So put yourself into the shoes of a single mom, single dad, but single mom with two kids working two jobs, because the cost of living crisis is pushing us to the point that we're struggling, right? So we finished, that single parent finishes work at 6 o'clock in the evening. Maybe they've been on the go from job number one, which they started at 5 in the morning. All right. They're coming home. They're in a rush. They've got to fetch the kids from whoever's been looking after them, whether that's a grandparent or childcare, or anything else. And they've got to get them home and they've got to feed them and bath them or shower them, get them clean, get them ready for bed and whatever it is. And they're knackered. They're tired. All right.
mm,
Now you've got two choices. You can go home and get your single food ingredients and cook a meal, or you can go via the fast food takeaway or use the Deliveroo and have a cheap, ready-made cooked food with all the health implications delivered to you.
Yeah.
And I can fully sympathize with that single parent when they take the easy option. I
Mm.
can, I know what it's like to be home at 5 o'clock and can barely see straight, and you've now got the washing to do and kids to feed and whatever it is. So we need to find a ways of where the environment changes to work within all of that, and we need to find a way. And I don't know what the answers are here. One of the answers is in legislation that makes sure that those instant foods are healthier. So how do we make sure? I mean, we have one success story in this country, and I don't have the study in front of me now, but a
Mm.
review was done about 4 months ago of the benefits of the sugar tax on the fizzy drinks.
Yeah.
To have a look at what that's actually done. So I think it's a year now since it was implemented, or maybe it's 5 years. I can't. Time goes by in a flash at the moment. But we have actually taken out something like 9% of the amount of sugars that kids are drinking by
Yeah.
the reformulation of the drinks. And it hasn't affected Coca-Cola's profits. It hasn't
Mm.
affected. They've reformulated. They've made the Coke Zero. They've made all these zero drinks. People are tending to go for those. Yes, they've now got aspartame in them. Yes, potentially that's got other health impacts. So, nothing's a perfect solution. But there isn't a shining example that you make a piece of legislation and you implement it and it has an effect. Whether
Yeah.
that's going to have the healthcare effects that we're expecting it to have, we're still waiting to see. But we have seen it's made an impact on child obesity already, a noticeable, a measurable one. And we know that children are getting slightly less sugar in their diet because of that one change.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
legislation can work. Of course, you've got your neo-libertarians going, that's state intervention, that's the nanny state, that's the nanny state. Well, we need to have that, because the problem is the opposite of the nanny state is runaway capitalism, which comes back to what we were saying earlier, where the manufacturers don't have the interest of the public at heart. They've simply got the interest of their shareholders at heart.
Yeah.
Not a single one of those companies reformulated their drinks until the sugar tax was imposed.
Okay.
Yep.
So I would now I what I would say to that is I admire your optimism, but I don't have as much faith in politicians as you do. I mean, I think if we have to wait, look how long it took for those sugar taxes to be introduced. And what about the people who are struggling now, today, who are on the verge of stepping into disease, or stepping into, and potentially they're cutting short their lives by the things they're eating, the things that are in their environment that are affecting them. So I think we need to, yes, it's fine if the politicians say they're going to be doing things in the background. I mean, look at the whole gambling industry. At the end of each gambling advert, it says be gamble aware or some nonsense. The fact that these things are even there means the politicians are allowing it to be there. And then they're just telling them to put a little caveat on the end of it as if that makes it okay. So I don't have faith in these people to get it right, to have our interest at heart. They're more probably persuaded by these large corporations who are donating to their parties. So I think we need to think about what we're doing on a personal basis with our health. So how about we start thinking, we've got to start thinking for ourselves and be aware, like you said before, about these messages and thinking, so people can start to understand and educate themselves. Is that messaging BS? What should I really be doing? I think we need to take it down back to the fact of health span as a focus is proactive. If you want to expand your health span, you've got to be thinking about the preventative things. That's the only way. Lifespan is all about the reactive stuff. Wait till something goes wrong. So I think if the government does one thing, they need to be thinking about talking about health span and how to promote that through the NHS and their messaging. But as individuals, we need to stop thinking about living longer and think about living better. It's what can I be doing today, tomorrow, the next day that invests in my health span, so I'm going to lead a healthy life. Forget what the media is saying, forget what the government are doing. Great if they're on my side, but I'm not going to rely on it. What can I do for myself to make sure that I'm putting something in the bank so that I can live longer and live better?
Absolutely agree. And just to really put my flag to the mast, or hang my colors of the flag, I have no faith in the politicians, and particularly not the current crop.
Okay.
So yeah, but I do believe that something has to be done, potentially, hopefully, with the next bunch of politicians to bring them on board. Yep. And I think that's going to be research, because while I think we can take responsibility now and there's stuff we can do, which I'll go to a second, I think that from a whole society point of view, the environment has to be changed.
Yeah.
And that is going to require authorities, not necessarily central authority, it could be local authority. So more and more local authorities are now bringing in individual groups to look at their health within their environments. For me, the challenge, and I know this because I'm involved with a couple in the local area, is at the moment it's a lot of talk. And you can produce 1,000,001 documents about what you're going to do, but until something actually happens on the ground, you're not going to see any change. So something needs to be done to convert talk to action. So I think there needs to be, but as you say, what can people do right now? And I think the fundamental part to start with all of that is to understand what it means to be healthy. I think a lot of people don't do that. So if you are taking 2 or more medications every single day to suppress some sort of symptoms, you are not healthy. And those medicines might be helping you to carry on, but they're not making you healthy, right?
Yeah.
The path to health is not the same as the path to disease. Right? I'll repeat. So while you're taking those medications, you need to be thinking about what you need to do to get yourself off those medications. And again, I'll put in the caveat, yes, there are some people that need medication for life for something that's, but that is the minority, not the majority.
Yeah.
All right. The industry today would like you to think that you need to be on statins for the rest of your life, even if you've never even had any heart complaint, but because both your parents might have had a heart disease at some point. Maybe what we should be looking at is what did your parents eat through their lives before they had that heart attack, and make sure you don't do the same thing, rather than you just start taking preventative statins. And that comes down to something that you and I were talking about a little bit before we came on air. And it's probably worth discussing because we're talking about what it means to be healthy. So I was referring to a statement that I heard in a webinar that I attended, where a chap was talking about technology, and he made this brilliant statement because the question was around AI and all the big stuff we're hearing about ChatGPT, etc. And he made the statement that to see technology as the solution to life's problems is to see life itself as a problem. And we've extended that, myself and my partner within our company, the BERG F, to say, well, let's firstly understand that medication is a technology, right? We use technology to formulate these drug targets and these medications. And if you think of that, if you're thinking of medication as a technology, then the question needs to be asked is, to see medicine as the solution to life's ailments leads to seeing life itself as the ailment. And that's quite an important thing to think about. So we have come to accept aging or irregular aging or unhealthy aging as normal. All right. We have come to accept, people in a Zimmer frame and mobility scooters in their 60s and early 70s. We're accepting that as normal.
Obesity.
Right? Yeah. Let me tell you what's normal. And I know there's the caveat that her life was, was gifted and the environment was perfect. But normal aging is what we saw in the late Queen.
Yeah.
Right. Where, 95, 96, in really, really good health, still functioning, still fulfilling her duties, etc. And then suddenly very, very sick for 2 days and died. Right. Yeah. That's aging. That is what we are all capable of. Yes, in that instance, it was much easier for her because she had Sandringham Estate to wander around on and ride horses and all the best support you can get. Literally the best support that money could buy, which we don't all have access to. But that's aging. What we've come to accept as aging is not healthy aging. That has been brought on us, and we've been taught that that's the problem. We spoke about this off air where we said that the D in PTSD, which stands for disorder, is probably the wrong word, and there is some research to this because the symptoms that we associate with PTSD is not a disorder. It's the actual normal, healthy response to trauma.
Of course, yeah.
And what we need to do is help people get over their trauma so that their bodies will then stop with what we've now diagnosed or what we're claiming is the disorder. All right.
Yeah.
In fact, you can actually get healthier through traumatic stress if it's managed properly and if there is an endpoint. All right. very briefly touch on Robert Sapolsky's work. So if anybody wants to really read themselves, Dr. Robert Sapolsky wrote a book called Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers. All right. And effectively, his point of view was the stress response that the zebra goes through when it sees the lion is our stress response to everything, right? And that stress response, that stress response gives it everything it needs to run, jump, skip, and hopefully get away from the lion. But in the case of the zebra, the second the lion's not there, that stress response switches off. All right. They're out of it. They're no longer in that highly strung, sympathetic nervous, sympathetic nervous state. What we have today is that we're, with things like post-traumatic stress, but everything else is that, the zebra goes away. We're out of the war zone if we're a soldier, but we're not finished with dealing with it. We're still in the trauma state.
Yeah.
And
So we've
giving people
medicalized the
drugs,
normal response.
yeah, and giving people drugs to suppress the symptoms never allows them to get over the trauma.
Yeah. Yeah. I think
So
so.
yes,
It's interesting. I think we have as a society, we've medicalized normal responses to things, haven't we? We've almost,
yes,
I think, like we were saying earlier, things like high blood pressure, almost being thought of as diseases in themselves, even though they might just be signals. They're being thought of as diseases in themselves. High cholesterol seen as disease in itself, but actually they're just signals in the body that may or may not mean something. So if we start thinking
sorry,
then
just
with
to,
our
just to iterate there. Sorry, Jonathan, you hit that on the head. Bang on there. That was about the best description I could possibly give. All right. The high blood pressure, to use the example you just used, is the symptom of something else. We've turned high blood pressure into a disease. And because we've turned it into a disease, we've gone up with a whole range of drug targets to help us suppress the symptom. But it's not. It's the symptom of something else.
yeah.
All right. It's something else in our bodies related to our lifestyle that is causing the high blood pressure.
And
That's
interestingly,
the ill health, not the high blood pressure.
and there are lifestyle factors that can, if you, I mean, there's a big debate about whether cholesterol actually means what we think it means, but high blood pressure, blood triglycerides, central obesity, all of these things can be influenced by our lifestyle. If we start to pay attention, the way we exercise, the way we eat, the way we sleep, whether we choose to drink or not, all of these things can be influenced through, I guess I always think of them as lifestyle medicine. And I'm not meaning medicine literally, but I always think of these things, these factors, your lifestyle medicine. We've got all of these things that within our reach that we can use to transform how we feel and actually increase our health span, as long as we know how to do them and when to do them. But I think that's probably where maybe we should bring this to a close by thinking about this is where we need to go. Understanding lifestyle medicine, why your sleep affects your metabolic health, why your diet affects it, why how you train affects it, why how you fast, all of those things, we need to start understanding those. And I think if the NHS were serious about preventative medicine, which is what people like Keir Starmer say they want to focus on, they need to be talking about these, because at the moment 99% of the conversation is around medical interventions and 1% of the conversation is around what I'm going to refer to as lifestyle medicine.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And I say, just for me, we need to change the definition, or we need to understand the definition of what it is to be healthy. And only once we know what we mean within ourselves by being healthy can we then look at what we need to do in order to achieve that state or maintain that state.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, Neill, this has been, as always, a great conversation. I just want to recap on some of the things that you've talked about today. We talked about, I think some of the points you said to people, we get to learn to read some of the research out there. Only thing I find, what I would say about that, sometimes even just reading the conclusions are often at odds with the actual results in the paper. But I think sometimes it is really useful to be able to read beyond what you hear in the media headlines. So yeah, take Neill's advice, learn to read scientific papers. You'll benefit massively from that. Avoiding processed foods. I think the point I threw in was about the caveman as well. Try and think about, what could a caveman have eaten this thing that I'm about to throw in my mouth? Would my grandparents have been able to eat this thing I'm about to eat? And Neill's great line about eat something that's cooked by a person, not a corporation. I think that's a really good one. Cooked by a person, could be yourself, could be a chef, but not by a corporation. And Neill, I want to throw in that quote of yours from earlier. The pathway to health is not the same as the pathway to disease. So remember, just by eliminating symptoms of illness. It doesn't mean we're making ourselves healthy. You can't medicate your way to wellness. Okay. So Neill, just want to close up, where can people find out more about the work that you're doing at the BERG F and all the other interesting things you've been up to?
All right, so the BERG F, which is the Bioenergetics Research Group, and the F stands for Foundation, because we're a non-profit, is a company that I've set up with my partner, who's also my PhD supervisor. And this goes to a little bit of exactly what we're talking about. The idea behind the BERG F is to be able to channel social impact funds within corporations into independent research, the research that looks at the path to health, not to the path to treating to symptoms. So, Jonathan, I think if you'll be kind enough, which I think you said you would, at the end of this, we'll put a link to what we call our plugin page. And this is an opportunity for corporations. So we know more and more businesses today have a social impact budget and have funds to put towards social impact. And through a group called Plugin, we have a channel by which people can make those funds available to us and to other nonprofits as well, but also get a benefit from that in terms of marketing feedback and ways that you can that your corporate can what's the word I'm looking for, can actually message what you're doing with your social impact funds. And very interestingly, the way we've set ours up is we've got 3 different sponsorship opportunities. So for corporates that have a small budget, we have an option available to you. We have options available for people that want to get, or companies that want to get behind a specific PhD project and fund a studentship for a researcher right through their PhD. And then we have some very big options for those that want to strategically partner with us going forward in terms of developing labs, etc. So any company that has a social impact budget, irrespective of how big or how small, please look at the plugin link at the bottom, which will show you where you can go and how you can find out more about ourselves and the kind of research that we channel your funds into, which I say is not designed towards drug targets. It's designed around that pathway to health. And hopefully people can get involved in that. And for everybody else out there, yeah, just remember that we'll go back to that primary message. Cook food, eat food cooked by a person, not by a corporation, and get some physical activity in. That doesn't have to be in the gym. That could be in the garden.
Nice one, Neil. Thank you. And for everyone who's listening, I hope you take on board the message Neil said there about looking to sponsor and support some of the great work they're doing around this lifestyle medicine, how your staff and how the public can learn to lead happier, healthier lives. Because once we start understanding these things and educating the next generation as well, we can start to reverse these statistics we're seeing around obesity and around all these other diseases. So hopefully this has been a useful episode for everyone. Neil, I want to thank you for your time. Thanks for coming to speak to us on the Wellbeing Wire, and I look forward to having you on as a resident, I won't say expert because I know you don't like that word, a resident enthusiast soon. And everyone, have a great rest of your day, and I'll speak to you all soon.
Cheers, Jonathan. Thank you.